So firstly, I'd just like to thank Peter Llewellyn for the opportunity to present at one of his MedComms networking brunch club meetings. So it's a pleasure to be here. My name's Lauri Arnstein, and I'm going to be giving you a brief introduction to patient-centricity. And this is a really big area, so we're just going to be focusing in specifically on patient-centricity in medical communications. So first things first, a bit about me. So I am Patient Partnership Liaison at Envision Pharma Group. Envision Pharma Group is a medical communications agency. It's a global agency, and it's full service, so covers publications, medical affairs, multi-channel and digital. And really my role within this is that I'm part of a team who are focusing on delivering Envision's initiative to bring the patient voice into every aspect of medical communications. And so this is across the board, publications, medical affairs, and really just each one of pharma's activities that we support with. And so this ties in nicely with my background. So I'm a medic by training, practiced as a junior doctor for a short time before moving into medical writing. So I worked for nearly 4 years, mostly in oncology, kind of medical affairs side, as a medical writer. And over that time, I became more and more involved in sort of the patient-centricity work. And that has grown and grown over time, and it's now become a standalone role for me. So that's something that I'm quite excited about. So let's just start with some basics. So what is patient-centricity? And it's actually been surprisingly hard to tie down the terminology in this space. So there's all kinds of different words around it, sort of patient participation, patient involvement, patient centricity. And we actually like to talk about patient involvement because that's really comes to the core of actually involving the patients in a substantial way. But patient centricity is something that's talked about a bit more widely across the industry. And a team from AstraZeneca actually co-created this definition with patients and their caregivers, and I think it gives quite a nice introduction. So it defines patient centricity as putting the patient first in an open engagement of the patient to respectfully and compassionately achieve the best experience and outcome for that person and for their family. So that's quite wordy, but really what that means to me is that the relationship is transparent, it's based on trust. It's a true partnership where patients have an equal seat at the table along with all the other stakeholders. And it's not tokenistic, that's really key. So it has to be substantial, it has to add value, and it has to have the ultimate aim of improving health outcomes. So what does this look like for pharma? So patients are the ultimate end users of pharmaceutical products. And so there's enormous opportunities to involve them across every stage of the medicine's development lifecycle. So moving right from the very kind of basic landscape analysis where you're setting research priorities to meet unmet needs for patients, through the research design and planning, through to the research conduct and operations. And this is actually the area where patient involvement is currently strongest. There's quite a large precedent of getting patients involved in planning clinical trials, helping with the design to kind of make sure that trials that are going to find it easier to recruit patients and also to retain them, because the way the trial is conducted is more acceptable to those patients. That's quite an active area. And then moving through to you have the data, and now it's about disseminating the data, communicating it, and the post-approval phase of gathering real-world evidence and getting the product approved. And so this is a massive area. There's a lot of literature out there if you want to kind of explore more about the different phases of the life cycle. But we're just going to be focusing on the post-study communication phase. So I think it's really important to note that patients aren't waiting for us. They're looking for scientific content. In a lot of cases, they're actually creating it themselves, and they're sharing it online within their communities. And it's almost we're kind of catching up with this in order to support it. It's already happening. So here we've got a great example of a patient with breast cancer who attended the San Antonio Breast Cancer Symposium as a delegate, wrote a report, and they've posted it online here on Patient Power. And there's a lot of examples of patients who are actually going out there and looking at this data and then bringing it to their own communities. And these examples, I think, really also highlight some of the challenges that patients face in this space. So we've got a great example here from a patient who's posting on a multiple sclerosis forum. And they're saying, just wondering what publications publish the latest medical research and trials. Is The Lancet a good publication? And that's a question that no one who kind of works in any kind of medical communications or pharma would be asking. Obviously that's a very high standard publication, but because the articles are behind a paywall, it's impossible for patients to judge. Is this good quality research? Is this relevant to me? I can't read it, so I'm assuming that it's not. So I think that's a really just one snapshot of the massive challenges that patients face in this space. Gaining access to scientific content because it's behind a paywall, or if it's not behind a paywall, it's then not accessible because it's not written in a way that a member of the public could understand. So that adds a further barrier. And there's also the issue of relevance. So obviously, most scientific content is written for an academic audience, an HCP audience, and actually it's not really bringing out points which are relevant to a patient, that they can use to discuss with their doctor to, really enhance shared decision making. And that's really the basis of getting the patient voice heard within a medical communications. So what's pharma's perspective in all of this? And so most companies have really embraced the concept of patient involvement. It's something that they're really wanting to demonstrate, and they're wanting to show that they're, taking it seriously. But practical implementation is a huge challenge. So they're aware that there's massive opportunities, but there's also some barriers, and those are both real and also perceived, and overcoming them is quite difficult. So, for example, a really key barrier is compliance. So there's a lot of fear around talking directly to patients. That's being equated with promoting to patients and changing the mindset that actually promotion is not the same as communicating is quite challenging. Patient-centricity also has to come as a result of a cultural kind of sea change across an entire organisation. That takes quite a lot of time. People can't just work in silos on this. It has to be across the company. And it also has to come from the top down. So you need senior buy-in, and that takes time. And it's also quite a difficult area to demonstrate and measure value. So, getting investment into this can be challenging because there's no really clear metrics that you can use to measure the value. So just to look at one really relevant example in this space at the moment, we're looking at plain language summaries. So these are something that you're going to be seeing more and more of, especially if you're, for example, a writer working in publications, because there's some regulations coming through actually in the EU at the moment that every clinical trial that is being held in the EU needs to have a plain language summary of the results. And then these are actually going to be stored in a central database, which should be up and running, hopefully, fingers crossed, 2019. So pharma companies are really going to have to start developing these summaries. And there's also increasing interest in plain language summaries of journal publications, so peer-reviewed publications, and also Congress content, so things like abstracts that would be sort of appropriate for a member of the public to understand. And so this is obviously a huge opportunity. It's something that's coming and that pharma have to be ready for. And it's really a really great opportunity to provide clear, accessible and relevant scientific content, which is really tailored for the patient. It's an opportunity to co-create content with patients. So you can have patients, either authoring these, contributing to them, reviewing them, either for relevance or for understandability. And the ultimate aim there is to improve communication between patients and doctors, ultimately enhancing shared decision-making and health outcomes. But kind of balanced against this are some barriers, really just the same barriers that we talked about on the previous slide. So there's the cost there, it adds complexity. For example, adding a lay summary into a publication plan, it adds an extra layer of complexity, which people might be reluctant to address. For example, if it may not be appropriate to do a plain language summary of every publication, but then, which do you choose and how can that be avoided as being perceived as cherry picking the data? And then again, there's those compliance concerns and overcoming the perception that communication is the same as promotion. And really one of our roles as a medical communications agency is to provide practical guidance and support for pharma to help them overcome these challenges, to sort of make sure that it's a valuable contribution that the patients are making here, that it's all done in a very transparent and compliant way, and in a way that's actually going to support this shared decision making. So I know that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but in summary, there's a move within pharma to involve patients across the entire research and development lifecycle, including medical communications. This is a really rapidly evolving space. Patients aren't waiting for us. They're really taking the initiative here, and it's up to us to kind of support in a way that adds value and is substantial. And there's enormous opportunities for patient involvement in medical communications, and the need now is for pharma to have practical guidance to navigate these challenges so that they can really form this true partnership. So thank you very much for listening, and if you have any questions, my details are up here, so please just get in touch.